It's that time of year again, where we get to look through all of the incredible games that have released this year, talk about which ones are the best, and maybe argue about semantics on what counts as a new game. But either way, let's jump straight into the top 10 games of 2024. Number 10, Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit. FNAF Into the Pit is the 10th anniversary celebration of the FNAF series. And as that, I think the game is fantastic. It has so many references and so many small details that fans of the series are going to love. Like what's required of by this franchise at this point. There's so many small details. Seriously, you need to pay attention to everything when you're making these games because the fans will be paying attention to every individual pixel. Like, I am not kidding. If you accidentally miscolor like a single pixel on a single sprite, basically any color, someone is going to end up noticing eventually and think it's really important. But when we begin to talk about things like gameplay or the horror aspects of a horror game, that's where this starts to fall flat. The gameplay loop is relatively simple. Well, technically not this exact type of game, point-and-click adventure. And it's fun. It's enjoyable enough, but it's stuck in the weird case of a game I really don't think I'm ever going to come back to or play a second time. Which sucks, because this is the first game in the entire franchise, 11 games in, to have difficulty settings or anything to incentivize you coming back for a second playthrough. And the horror aspect, look, this is a complaint so many people have had with recent FNAF games. It really isn't that scary, and that isn't the worst issue for me specifically. I come to these games for their lore, their story, because genuinely I'm so, at this point, stuck in this community that I have to like it. No, seriously, it's been 10 years. Someone help me. Right, then moving along to number 9. And at number 9 is Mario Party Jamboree. Which, God, I wish I had more positive things to say about this game. But it's a really mixed bag. I think the board selection is incredible. The character roster is great. That's about it that I have positive to say, because I'm just gonna be blunt. The minigames are not that good. Will I like the majority of the ones that are there? I manually counted the amount of minigames available in the main Mario Party mode that are not motion control based, which can be toggled off and will be by most players, is 43. For a game Nintendo advertised as having the most minigames in any Mario Party, it has the least minigames in the game mode called Mario Party! Well, the other 70 minigames are probably still fun. The Koofathlon gets very boring and repetitive very quickly. I enjoyed it the first couple times. Bowser's Bomb Squad, same case. It's fun maybe once or twice, but gets repetitive and boring very quickly. It's very clear that Nintendo's focus was on the side modes, which sucks, because the actual core Mario Partying of this game is fantastic. The boards, both new and old, are fantastic. The item play is as good as ever. The character roster is fantastic. The fact you have so many options is amazing. But there's no mini games. You are going to see all of them within a couple games. And I just mentioned this, but the options are great. You can turn on random, classic, or no bonus stars. Pro Rules is a thing which removes a lot of RNG elements to the game. Some I like, some I dislike. You can choose to vote on what minigames you play. That's great! So what if we added a feature that makes it so you can buy 2 stars at once and just can't be turned off? The buddy system is really weird to me, because from a casual perspective, it's cool, it's fun, I like it. But when you add in a pro mode and actively add settings and things to remove RNG, the buddies should not be in pro mode, and if they should be optional. Also, the online is stupid. I've played 2 games of it. It either ran at 1 frame a second or there were no other human players. Mario Party Jamboree is a game that has the recipes to have been incredible. And I think it still is really fun at its core. But like, the lack of minigame variety combined with the weird indecisiveness on what features can be toggled on and off just kind of leave a bit of a sour taste in my mouth. Don't get me wrong, I've really enjoyed playing the game thus far, and I've played every board at least once. And again, I like them all. I think the majority of the minigames that are available in the main board play are fun. I appreciate that you can turn off the motion minigames and play with something that isn't half of a Joy-Con. I don't know why the motion minigames need half a Joy-Con, but they do. But genuinely, I do like this game. It just has a lot of flaws that really shine through when you look at the game from a more analytical perspective. Sonic X Shadow Generations is the first game on this list that is in a really awkward spot of if it should be counted as a new release. Personally, I think the Shadow half counts. So basically, for the sake of this video, I'm counting Shadow Generations and all of its levels and its story as a new game for this year, but Sonic X Shadow Generations does not count, and all of the parts that were in the original Generations release are not in this video, or any additions they made to the base generation. Hopefully that made sense, because I really like Shadow Generations. I think it's great. The moveset's fantastic, with a ton of different additional tech that you can perform. Most of it was probably not intended by Sega, but hey, using Chaos Spear to just propel yourself forward is cool. Overall, Shadow's moveset is great. It feels a bit overwhelming at first, but after a level or two, I got the hang of it, and it felt fantastic to control. And then they slowly begin to give you some additional abilities that come in at a fairly consistent pace without overwhelming you. And on top of that, the level design is fantastic. There's a ton of alternate routes, and well, you've probably all heard this before from other reviewers, that's kind of what makes a Sonic game good. How many alternate routes are in it? What are the punishments? Because this game never felt hard, but it always felt awful when you fell down to a slower path or missed a jump. It was always my fault, but it really sucked, because I was stoked when I was able to land those shots, and it made for some amazing moments when you run through an entire level without messing up. Especially if you can do a pretty decent run on your first try. Genuinely, it's fantastic. And that's before even getting into the overworld. Because this game's overworld takes from Sonic Frontiers and has a pretty open area with a ton of things to explore, and frankly, look, it's Sonic. The moveset is just fun to goof around with. I enjoy just running around in this open area. And I think this does a great job as a hub world. It's way better than, you know, the original Generations. And as a sort of mini island from Frontiers, I think it does a great job with that design philosophy. Overall, I think it's a great game with great movement, great levels, and it's just really fun. Like, it's nothing exceptional. If you like Sonic, you're gonna love this game. But there's not much more I can say past that. Either way, moving straight ahead onto number 7 is Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Wow, I can't believe they made a Zelda game where you play as Link. But in all seriousness, it is actually really surprising it took this long to have a mainline Zelda game starring Zelda. But with that aside, let's actually talk about the gameplay and story of Echoes of Wisdom. And God, the combat exists. I really wish I had more positive to say on it, but like, it was basically just an auto battler. And the bosses are easily the worst part, and standard combat, honestly, I just skipped most of it unless it was required or had a reward at the end of it. But the puzzles were fantastic. Genuinely, so many of them felt incredibly good to solve. Most of them felt reasonable. There were only like 2 puzzles in the entire game that I thought were genuinely frustratingly bad. But for the most part, it was enjoyable. And the actual puzzle design is genuinely fantastic. The fact that most of them have so many solutions, and all of which have relatively intuitive solutions, even if you have to think for a little bit. It's so fun. It's the reason the puzzles in Tears of the Kingdom are great. This time, it's just a more top-down Zelda. I say more top-down because I swear to God, half this game is 2D side-scrolling. What are you, the Adventures of Link? But aside from that, there isn't too much I can say because I don't want to spoil the puzzle design for those who haven't played it, but Zelda 2 has phenomenal puzzles, genuinely. If you're a fan of the more open style of Zelda that we've seen in the 3D titles in recent years, this is that, but in the 2D formula, and I highly recommend it. Either way, let's move on to number 6. Astro Bot is an amazing game that, honestly, I thought I would have placed higher in this list. And frankly, it probably deserves to be in the top 5. Again, weird shenanigans of what counts as a new game. We'll get to that when we get there. But Astro Bot aside is fantastic and is what I want to see from companies like Nintendo and Sony. And honestly, the entire AAA gaming industry as a whole, seriously, take notes! The fact is, it's a completely put together, full game that doesn't overstay its welcome, is incredibly polished and fun throughout, filled with charm, and despite having a digital deluxe edition that comes with extra cosmetics, has no content that is paywalled, because those cosmetics are just early unlocked. And did I mention this game is just incredibly fun? And for the most part, almost every single level is really well designed. I say for the most part because there are a couple levels that have a bit of awkward design, and that's fine. Like, realistically, 1 or 2 levels that are a bit more iffy when the majority of the levels are genuinely the quality I'd expect out of something like a 3D Mario game is impressive. And on top of that, the game is incredibly great in terms of visuals. Genuinely, I don't have much I can say on that you can't just see with your own eyes, but it looks fantastic because, honestly, it's a game that, while it goes for realism at some points, is still stylized, fun, and vibrant at all points. Tops it off with the fact the game is making full use of the PS5's hardware to look as great and feel as great as it does. Honestly, one of my biggest issues with the game is actually its over-reliance on existing PlayStation IP. The fact is, a ton of the cameo bots in this game are very obvious fan service. And will I can enjoy that? There are 3 Persona references in this game. My favorite game of all time is Persona. So, I can enjoy that, but at the same time, I feel like it holds this game down from being able to stand out completely on its own. Seriously, it's a really awkward line to cross, where at one point, yes, the fan service is awesome, it's great, I love it, but on the other hand, I do feel like it's hurting the game in its ability to be its own completely original thing, which it is. For clarification, Astro Bot would be in this exact same spot in this list, with almost the exact same thing I have to say, except for this last, minute of me talking, even if it had nothing to do with pre-existing IPs. Because the game is genuinely amazing. But with that, let's move on to number 5. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Or as I referred to it as for most of my playthrough, Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2. And that exact sentence is why the game is all the way down here at number 5. That, and there were really great games this year. The problem with Rebirth is just the fact it doesn't stand on its own. It is the middle part of a story, and you can tell. Legitimately, when the Game Awards got announced this year, I forgot this game released this year. I played it after it released. I played it in March or April, and I completely forgot I had played this game this year. Not because it's bad, not because I didn't enjoy it, because it is the middle part, so it blended together in my brain with the original part. It would have been number 3 or 4 if it was the exact same game, but it was a standalone game and wasn't the middle part of a story. I don't mind it being a sequel, but I mind it being a sequel that really shouldn't be. I think this game and this goes for remake, and this goes for whatever's gonna come next, would easily be way better if instead of releasing it in 3 parts, they waited until all 3 parts were completed and released them together. Now, yes, I know you can argue, oh, just play them like that. And I mean, I can, but when I originally played Final Fantasy VII Remake, I was unaware that it was part 1. I legitimately did not know till the game ended on a to be continued screen. But with that issue out of the way, the gameplay is great, the cutscenes are great, the game looks visually great. It is the rare PS5 exclusive. Genuinely, it fixed a lot of my issues that the original part of Final Fantasy VII Remake had. And I think this game is great. I enjoyed it. My casual playthrough was over 80 hours long. I did the majority of the side quests, not because I had to, but because they were fun, and I enjoyed playing the game. Look, it's a game that makes great use of the PS5, what it can do, looks great, plays great, has a great story. Seriously, the cutscenes, fantastic. There are a ton of playable characters I enjoyed playing as. It has a ton of customization. This game is really good. And that's before talking about the side content. There's an entire card game! Either way, we move straight ahead into number 4, Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. Does this count as a new game release? I don't know. You can't play it on its own. You have to play through a certain degree of the base game to even get to it, and you carry over all the stuff you have between both the base game and the DLC. But it's an entire new game's worth of content that you can treat as an entirely new game if you wanted to. It's a bit iffy, but I think it's enough to count it. It's a harder cut than other DLCs I've included in the past, but I think it counts, so we're gonna discuss it. And I mean, it's FromSoft, it's a Soulsborne game. It's fantastic. The fights are incredibly difficult, but incredibly rewarding. The controls are incredibly tight and feel fantastic. Again, it's FromSoft. They excel at making this exact type of game, and once again, it is amazing. Like, it's really hard because there's not much more I can say. The exploration is great, as it was in the original Elden Ring, and again, the bosses are incredibly fun. The controls are great. There's not much more I can say, because it's all stuff you've definitely heard before if you've heard anyone talk about almost any Soulsborne. But I think one of the most interesting parts about this game is the turnaround from the original Elden Ring, because Elden Ring is considered one of the easiest and one of the most accessible to beginners Soulsborne game FromSoft has made, and I agree with that. Shadow of the Erdtree is considered the exact opposite, one of their hardest games. Again, a great comparison is, personally in my playthrough, I found Millennia way easier than almost every single boss in this DLC, and easier than all of the story bosses. And we're talking about what people consider the toughest boss in the base game. Now, given you can definitely create builds to counter a lot of the DLC bosses, and it's a lot easier too than in the base game since you have access to so much more, since you have the entire base game available to you. But like, if you're having to make an entire build to fight one boss, when you didn't need to do that before, that kinda shows the level of difficulty. This is the sort of thing where you know what you're getting into. It's Elden Ring, it's FromSoft, it's that exact kind of game. If you like it, you know what you're getting, and it is fantastic, as always. Either way, let's move straight on to the honorable mentions. First up on the honorable mentions is a game that you probably would have assumed would have made the top 3 since you haven't seen it yet. Persona 3 Reload. Look, if you're new around here, I am a massive fan of the Persona series, and probably surprising that this only made the honorable mentions. The actual reason is I haven't played it. I didn't have the time when it released, and then I decided I'd wait for it to go on sale, and then Metaphor released, and I didn't want to play another game very similar really close together, especially considering these are 100-hour games. So it's currently just sat on my Steam wish list. I mean, it's probably really good. Persona 3 had an incredible story, and if they were able to modernize it and make the gameplay loop a lot more fun and less repetitive, and Tartarus. I think this game could be great, but I can't really comment since I haven't played it. So yeah, either way, let's move on to the next game in the honorable mentions, which I also haven't played. Another Crab's Treasure, or how I often refer to it as Crab Souls. It's a really saturated and colorful Souls-like, and again, I think I'm going to enjoy the game when I get around to it. But like the majority of the games in this year's honorable mention, I didn't get around to playing it. Look, I still have to play Bloodborne, I still have to play Dark Souls 3, I have to play a lot of FromSoft's catalog first. Either way, the last game I haven't played in this list is Mario and Luigi Brothership. The game I accidentally called Brotherhood earlier. Looks like a ton of fun, I like a lot of the other Mario RPGs I've had the ability to play, and also, the game, like, visually I think is the best looking game on Switch. I'm gonna be honest, I love its art style. It is so creative, so fun, so expressive. Now given, IGN did give it a 5, but once I get around to playing it, I'll have to judge for myself. Lastly, the only game on this list that I've actually played, Marvel Rivals. Look, it came out while I was editing this video. I cannot, like, restructure so many parts of this video to consider including this game in the top 10, because I would have to start from scratch on this video with the amount of things I'd have to re-record and re-edit. And personally, I'd prefer to get this video out before the end of 2024. That, and I'd be a bit hesitant to include Marvel Rivals on the actual list because of recency bias. I'd talk about it more, but I am actually considering making a video on this game, so I'll probably hold off till that. So I'm not certain that number 3 should even be on this list, but also, it's my favorite Mario game of all time. The Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door remake slash remaster slash port slash I do not know what this is. Like, unironically, I'm genuinely not sure if this is a remaster or remake. At the very least, it's a remaster because the visuals look so much better, but I don't know if they changed enough to be a remake. But at the same time, I don't know what it looks like under the hood. It's kind of hard to talk about. What's more interesting to talk about is, does this really count as a new game release? Like, it is an incredibly faithful remake if it is one, and if it's a remaster, then in a lot of ways, it's a port of a game from 2004. But, honestly, I don't care. This is genuinely my favorite game in the entire Mario franchise. Like, if it is a game that Mario is in, this is my favorite one. I love the classic Paper Mario games, and I am so happy that this game is now reasonably available to people. Seriously, you should not have to pay like $100+ for this game. Now you can pay retail, which for a AAA game nowadays isn't that much better, but it's an improvement. But with that aside, genuinely, gameplay's fantastic. It has an incredible story. All the things I've said about this game in 2 separate reviews now. And again, as for should it be on the list, I don't care, it's my list. And I love this game. And as for what's new in the Switch version, there's 2 brand new optional bosses that are quite the grind to get to. Because yes, I wanted to do the Pit of 100 Trials again. Which, for clarification, the later floors of that are quite fun, but the earlier floors, where you're mostly fighting enemies that you easily outlevel, well, isn't. But the other major thing this version has over the original is it is friggin' gorgeous. This is genuinely, I know I just said this about Brotherhood, but again, one of the best looking Nintendo games. They're really good at making good looking Mario RPGs, okay? I mean, the original that runs at 420p still looks gorgeous to this day, so of course a 1080p version does, but that's besides the point! Also, the game only runs at 30 FPS instead of the original 60, which did mess up my timing on its several different inputs. It's not that big of a deal, not nearly as much as people were making it out to be when the game was coming out and had just released, but that's my kind of brief discussion on Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door's 2024 Switch release. Again, I'd say remake or remaster, but I don't know which, so let's get to number 2, which will probably be even longer. So, before I reveal what the game is, I want to make it incredibly clear I have taken multiple days going back and forth between the top 2 options. But let's get straight to talking about Metaphor ReFantazio. And seriously, if you asked me tomorrow, could switch places with number 1. That is how close these 2 games are. As mentioned previously in this very video, I adore the Persona games by Atlus. and frankly, Atlus's style of making JRPGs in general. I love the Megaten games, so when Atlus announced a new JRPG in the same style of the Persona games, set in a fantasy setting that is separate to the Megaten series, which I'm doubtful on, I was super hype. And if you're wondering why I'm doubtful, the entire Devil Summoner archetype, like that rank onwards of that archetype, literally reuses assets from the Persona, SMT, and Soul Hackers games. Like, verbatim. It is a reference and meant to be fan service, but you still can't pretend like this game is separate when you're literally using your monster designs from your other series. Either way, if we actually talk about Metaphor itself, like always with Atlus, the presentation is fantastic. The gameplay is phenomenal. You know what you're getting into with this type of game, but that does not mean it is bad. There were plot twists that surprised me, combat that was great, and a really well written and well foreshadowed story. If I wasn't able to foresee a plot twist through the hints the game gave, I was always able to look at the evidence the game did give me beforehand to go, that makes sense. I love the party, and they're all really fun. The social links are, admittedly, pretty overall even in quality. There's a lot less standouts in terms of both good and bad than the Persona games. But frankly, I will take a really consistently good social link, because while it's a lot harder to find a standout, frankly, none of them are bad. And aside from that, the game, incredibly solid, as I've already said. I love the new synthesis attacks. It's a great way where you use 2 of your allies' turns and a higher TP or SP or HP cost to cast spells that are stronger than what you should be able to at the current level. So, for example, at low levels, you'll, instead of using smaller attacks, you'll use medium attacks, or get access to AoE moves early. The only part of the game I found disappointing or underwhelming is the music. Look, I'm gonna be blunt. The music, not awful, but I am never going to listen to Metaphor's OST outside of the game. There were no sounds or songs that were super enthralling and I would love to listen to actively. Which sucks, because the Persona games have consistently amazing music. And I'm not talking about the lack of vocal tracks, because there are amazing Persona tracks that have no vocals. Most of the Persona tracks are amazing. All of the dungeon themes in 5. And a small part of me wonders if Atlus knew this themselves, since the game's digital deluxe version and collector's edition come with a digital best of Atlus soundtrack, where, despite being the game this was a part of, didn't include a single Metaphor song in, while games like Persona 5 got multiple. Given that may have been because the fact is, both versions come with the Metaphor soundtrack themselves, but that's besides the point. So with that, we move on to number 1. Chrono Ark is a game you've probably not heard of before this video, but let me tell you, there is a reason I've scored it all the way up at number 1. And while some of it's a bit hard to talk about without spoilers, I'm going to do my absolute best to spoil nothing that is in this game, because this is a game that you should go into blind. So let's start this with the gameplay, which was the biggest turnoff for me, especially when I first played this game, because it is very complicated and I did not understand most of it. There's like 6 different card types, several, genuinely more than a dozen status effects. Each boss has their own completely unique gimmick. Top that off with nearly 20 characters who all play completely differently, and yeah, it's a lot to take in, especially on your first couple dozen runs, honestly. But once you find a character you really like using, and then use that character to learn the enemy's patterns and their mechanics, it's a really great learning curve where eventually you'll be bringing along characters that you don't really like using, but you want to learn. and maybe even find characters that you adore that you never thought you'd end up playing. And as for the gameplay, in case you weren't able to tell by both the footage on screen and my descriptions of it, it is a turn-based deck builder roguelike. So in case you aren't familiar with those terms, think Slay the Spire. Albeit, Chrono Ark has a much more noticeable focus on status effects for both your party and your enemies, and also a party system that allows you to bring along 2 characters of your choice at the start of a run, and then after beating the first world, you can bring along a 3rd chosen kinda at random. You get to pick between a couple, and then at the end of your 3rd world, you once again get another party member you can add, chosen relatively at random. Again, you're given a couple choices. And again, each party member plays pretty well completely differently. They each fall into one of 3 archetypes, but even within an archetype, hell, frankly, I think one of my favorite characters, in fact 2 of them, both healers, who are much better at DPS. So, you know, characters don't really have to apply into their own role, and I think some of them are better playing as different roles than the game gives them. Frankly, I find healers are mostly just characters that naturally learn a healing skill. But back on the topic of gameplay, there's also events, battles, special enemies. Top that off with genuinely an incredible gameplay system that rewards you for exploring. You know, that and the game's really addicting and really good. I have 100 hours for a reason. And on top of that, it has an incredible cast and an amazing story. And when I'm talking about the cast, I'm just talking about how the characters are written, and also it has a mechanic where you can become friends with everyone, which is really cool. And the story is where I kind of get to the I really want to keep this vague, because it is incredible. I genuinely do mean that. It is one of the best stories that has come out of a game to release this year, if not the best. And it's competing with stuff like Persona 3 and Metaphor, Final Fantasy VII. So frankly, to even be in the discussion of the best story from a game that's released this year, at least out of the ones I've played, is incredible. And yes, I know in the honorable mentions I said I didn't play Persona 3 Reload this year, or at all, which is true, but I have played the original and know what the story is. Either way, Chrono Ark is something you really need to go in blind for. All I will say about the story, because this is pretty clear from really early on, is it is a story that is in service of the gameplay, and gameplay that is in service of the story, which is an incredible feat for any game to achieve. But in all seriousness, I highly recommend Chrono Ark if you have not played it and are interested in this style of game. Either way, those are just my thoughts. What are yours? And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!